Everybody, and welcome to our final video, part 4 of our series on building large language model applications. Super excited to be here today and going over agents. We need to install a couple libraries, although if you've already been following along, you should have them installed: OpenAI, VLM, and Bits and Bytes. However, we are going to need to restart our inference engine if you still have that running. And the reason for this is the tool calling template, and we'll get into that in a second in the tools. But you'll want to run this wget command to pull down a Jinja template um, for tool calling so that we can enable tools with our agent. And then we're going to need to modify our VLM serve command. So you'll see we have a few new options here. We have tool call parser, enable auto choice, and chat template, right? So this is just informing VLM that, hey, when it comes to parsing tools, I want to use the Mistral parser. I want to enable the model to automatically choose a tool. So you can actually require it to choose a tool, or basically like manually force the model to choose a tool, or you can have it automatically sort of select it when it feels it's applicable. And then the chat template again is just the one we downloaded. It's a modified chat template that VLM recommends for Mistral. But let's slow down and talk about what tools are, right? So agents, if you think about a traditional LLM, like we've been using up until this point, a traditional LLM program, you have the query, you have the model, and then you pass the query into the model and you get an output, right? Plain and simple. Agents take it a step further and basically augment the model with what are called tools. And tools are really just functions, right? So in this case, we're going to build a simple inventory manager tool, or inventory manager agent, excuse me, with access to the following tools: a tool for listing all the items in an inventory, creating an item in the inventory, and deleting an item from the inventory. Again, these tools are just functions, and we'll take a look at that in a second. So once you have VLM up and running and you have the chat template pulled down and everything, we can redefine our OpenAI client here like we've done before, and we'll hop into defining our tools. All right, so we're going to build out our tools. Now, in order to keep this somewhat short and sweet, we're not going to build out a whole API, but we're going to pretend this is kind of like an inventory API, but we're going to kind of fake it with just a basic list and some functions. So we'll have an initial inventory, and each item in our inventory is going to have a name and a quantity. So we have 10 pencils, 15 pens, and 22 notepads. Now, here are our tool functions: list items, create item, and delete item. So list items is going to loop through the list, and it's going to create this string that represents our inventory. Create item is just going to append a new element to the list with that name and quantity that's been supplied. And then delete item is going to go through and essentially delete an item if it finds one with a matching name. That's it. That is the entirety of our tools. Now, in order to supply this to our model and really build our agent, we have to define a tool schema. Now, this is kind of the OpenAI tool calling spec here. So we'll step through this piece by piece. So each of our tools, right, we have one for delete item, create item, and list item. So they have a type. In this case, they're functions. And then we define the name, description, and any parameters that are required. Now, list items, its name is list items, and we give it a description. But as you can see up here, there's no parameters, right? We're just listing what's in the array. So we don't have any required parameters. So this is the schema for our list items tool that we need to supply to our API so that it knows that it has access to it and what parameters to fill in. And then likewise for create item, it looks very similar, but you can see we now have this parameter section. So we have to define the properties of the parameters. So we have name and quantity. So name is a type string, and it's the name of the item we want to create. And then quantity is an int, it's a number, and it's the quantity of the items that's for the item that's being created. And then we could set required, right? So you may have some parameters are optional, but in this case, they're both required, so I'm going to put them both in the required array. And then finally for delete item, it looks very similar, except we just have our one property, name, and that's the name of the item to delete, right? And let's take a look at calling a tool before we build the agent. So we're going to give it a system message. In this case, it's going to be a little more involved. So we're going to say, hey, you're a helpful inventory assistant here to help with user queries. So that's the personality and the instruction. Given a user query, call any required tools to get them an answer or perform the action they've requested. Otherwise, just provide an answer. And then we'll actually supply the list of tools. Now, this isn't always required, given that we are supplying the tools elsewhere, but 99% of the time, I recommend, and actually pretty much is required to put it here. You don't have to, but you probably won't have very good results. So definitely recommend you have a tools section, and we're just going to give it essentially the list of tools, their descriptions, and any required inputs. And then again, we're going to supply it. And you can see all that's different here is we provide a parameter called tools with our tools schema we defined up here. And we're going to ask create an item called keyboards with a count of 12. So what we'll do is we can now access, instead of message.content, we're going to access message.toolcalls. And if there's a tool call, we'll loop over the tool calls because that's also a list. We'll grab the function names and any arguments, and we're going to print that out just so we can see it. And then what we can do is, because it's defined, it's defined the function and any arguments, we can actually call those. So let's do this. Let's run this and see what we get here. Oh, I have not defined my OpenAI client, so let me just go up here and run that from earlier, and then come back down here. So we should see when we run this, we should see that oh, tools. I did not run this. This is why it's important to run your cells before you get any farther. All right, so a little bit of error handling there. We should see that, all right, it called create item with these arguments, and it created keyboards with quantity 12, right? And we can actually check this by changing this question. So let's say, show me the items in my inventory, right? So we'll do that. We're going to run it. And hopefully we should see that it lists out the items using our list items tool. So it called list items, and we got the output. We can see keyboards 12 is right down here. So that's awesome. In the next section, we're going to take a look at building an agent. We're just going to modify this loop a little bit so that the model can loop until it's ready to provide a final answer. All right, in this final section, we're going to take a look at building an agent. So we're going to take what we did in the previous section where we just tested out the tool. I'm just going to modify it slightly. So we're going to introduce this idea of an agent loop, right? So a lot of times, many of these agent libraries will allow an agent to take a number of steps, which is essentially just calling a number of tools or making a number of intermediate inference requests. Again, to keep things simple, especially because we have such a small model, we're gonna kind of pare it down a lot. But you could always, you pull down a bigger model and modify this slightly. So we're going to start with maximum number of steps, right? So it can't take more than 5 steps. This kind of just prevents it from infinitely looping. We're going to keep track of what it's done in this like steps taken. So we'll keep track of all the tools it called and what the outputs were. And then we'll keep track of how many steps it's taken in the steps variable so that we can, break out of that loop if needed. So again, pretty much identical to our previous system message. We're just going to define its task and that it has this list of tools. But in the instruction here, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to say, hey, given the user query and the steps you've already taken, either call one of the available tools or return a final answer. Do not explain the reason for the tool call, just call it. And if you've already called a tool that the user has asked for, summarize what you did or provide a final answer. Again, sometimes you have to kind of massage these prompts to get the model to respond in the proper fashion. But again, this is a little bit, we're starting to really push the bounds. Typically 7B models are not what you would build production grade agents off of. But for our use case here, this is fairly simple, so it'll work for what we're doing. So we're going to ask a question, create an item called binders with count 76. And what we're going to do is say, hey, while we've taken less than the maximum number of steps, we're going to ask the model, a question. We're going to give it a query. We're going to say, here's the steps taken, here's the query. And again, either call a tool or provide a final answer. And so if there's a tool call made, we're going to make the tool call. We're going to run the function, and then we're going to append that output to our steps taken. But again, this is all pretty hard coded. You can make this a lot more to make this a lot sleeker. But again, just for our simple use case here, we're just going to create a simple if else. So basically, if they ask for something and it determines it needs to call create item, we're going to call the create item function with the arguments that the model filled in, and then we're going to pull the output from that. And again, we put that in steps taken so the model can say, hey, oh, I already called that. I don't need to call it again. And then if it's done, we're just going to print out the final message. And we can see here that it ends up calling create item with these arguments. It created the binders with quantity 76, and then it provided our final output here. It was like, okay, I've already called that. Here's what I did. I created binders with quantity 76. And that's really the basics of an agent. We could change this up, right? If we wanted to change this up, we could say, um, what items are in my inventory, right? We could change this up and let's see what it does. So hopefully it calls that list items tool. Yep, we can see I've actually ran this a couple times. So we have binders in here twice. Um, and then hopefully it exits out. It says, hey, here's what your inventory contains because I've already called that tool. I don't need to call it again. And that does it for agents. So I want to thank everybody for sticking around for this series. If you've been with us since the beginning, thank you so much. Thank you to the amazing marketing team and everyone here at SealingTech and Parsons who's supported this journey. I really hope you'll stick around for future content. If you want to see more videos like this, more informational videos from the amazing technical team here at SealingTech and Parsons, please feel free to drop a follow, drop a like, and we'll see you in future video. Thank you.